Hi, everybody. I'm Charles from Teachers Discovery. If any of you have seen me on the Teachers Discovery YouTube channel, or if you've subscribed to Flangu, you've probably seen me a couple of times. Um, I'm so glad everybody could make it out. So thanks so much for joining us. Uh, Bryan, I'm going to let you go ahead and take it from here because this is your presentation today.
All righty. I don't have a bird to put on my shoulder. That's pretty cool. But hello, everybody. Welcome. I'm sure we'll have people joining us as we get started here. My name is Bryan. I teach Spanish in Ohio, near Canton, Ohio. And I've been in class live with students since August. And then this week we went remote for the first time. We've been face to face, wearing masks and separating as much as we can. And some of our students elected to do a virtual option, but we've been in class with students until this week. And we still don't have a lot of cases, but we have a lot of contact traced students who are in quarantine. And so for this last few days before break, we have been remote. So I think we're in a minority in that we've been teaching live for so long, but I know we're all in different situations. And so a lot of what we'll look at tonight can apply to in-class or virtual or hybrid. But if there are some specific things that really apply to those new situations, we can talk about those, or you can bring those questions up. There'll be time for questions at the end, we'll probably go 35, 40 minutes here, and I'll talk through some things, and then there should be plenty of time for questions. A lot of times questions and answers is where we can really learn a lot. So let me get us rolling here. Again, thank you for being here. I am Bryan, and hopefully you were able to see Ben last night. Sorry, let me move a couple things here. That's Ben. This is me. I'm Bryan. So yesterday, Ben talked about why to use stories and readers, and tonight we're going to look at how to use stories and readers. And I'm really going to kind of look at, because I know we're all in different places and we all have maybe different experiences and different levels of experience. And I'm going to kind of look at this at a pretty basic level, which doesn't mean if you've done reading, it doesn't mean there won't be things for you to grab from it too. But we're going to kind of look at it like maybe you haven't done a lot of reading or you're new to using novels in the classroom. And so we're going to start kind of basic. This was our write-up for tonight. Once we're convinced of why we read, which again, that was a lot of what Ben talked about yesterday, we need to know how to best use reading. How do we present text? What activities do we use? What kind of stories do we use? How do we make it so students can understand and comprehend? How do we hold them accountable? How do we read in a remote setting? So that's what we're going to get into tonight, and hopefully give you some practical tips that you can take with you and, maybe kind of work with over the break and jump into in January. There are really three keys, I think, to being successful with any kind of reading. Compelling text, things that students want to read, comprehensible text, things that students can read, making sure they can understand it, and then varying delivery. And I've done this presentation a few times before. If you've seen it, we kind of went through those. I'm going to do it a little different today. And we're really going to start more with the delivery part and talk about the steps that we take when we're doing a reading. A few important notes before we jump into those steps. I do really think that understanding why is essential for understanding how. And if you didn't get a chance to see the presentation yesterday, it would be a good idea. You can still watch this now, you'll be fine. But it is really a good idea to at least think about and understand why we use reading. And I think it's really important to be convinced of the power of reading, because reading is one of those things that when you first get started using it a lot, it can be difficult. You have to kind of get going with it, and that can take a while because sometimes students don't like reading in any language. And so it can be a challenge to get started. So we really need to be convinced of the power of it, and that'll help us into the how and some of the practical steps of it. Promoting target language reading requires a shift in expectations and goals. So when we're doing a reading, the primary goal is not vocabulary and grammar. Those things happen. Our students increase their abilities with vocabulary and grammar, but that's not the primary goal, and that's not what happens most. What the primary goal is improved proficiency, processing ability, and processing speed. sometimes that's a little harder to measure. We can measure very easily what vocabulary our students know because we can give them a list and they can define words, or grammar, they can fill out worksheets and charts and things. And that's really easy to see what they don't know and what they do know. Reading works more towards improving proficiency and processing, which is a little harder to see, but is very, very valuable as our students grow. Reading works also best in a class. So reading activities are best with those goals. And then if that's also the goal of the class, if improving proficiency, skills, processing speed are our primary goals, and vocabulary and grammar are just a part of that, then those type of classes are where reading works best. Which kind of goes along with this. Reading works best in a healthy classroom culture. So if we want reading to work well, we have to have good, strong classes. And I talk a lot about classroom culture. I do workshops just on that. But I always start any workshop with just a brief description of how important that is and how we set that up. But if we can have a good, healthy classroom where a lot of good world language practices are happening, reading fits into that better. And then this is not easy to do, but it's really helpful if you can get students to understand the value of reading and get them to buy in. Not just reading because the teacher says I have to, but really believing that when I read, it makes me a better speaker and a better writer, and it makes me a better communicator in the language. So whatever we can do to get students to buy in to the value of reading helps all the different little reading activities that we do. And again, not all students will do it, but we can get a lot of students to buy in, and that makes a big difference. Talking quickly about culture, these are some of the things that I think are important for a language class. Students, and again, we can talk for hours about this, but I'll just briefly share some of these keys. Students step into a new world when they enter. It feels different. It looks different. It smells different. It's Spanish class or French class. They're not intimidated, afraid to make mistakes. We are very gracious in our correcting. We make mistakes ourselves. Students feel accepted, valued, supported, empowered by everything we do. This is big for us. They expect to hear the target language at least 90% of the time. That is a norm, that is a cultural characteristic of our classrooms, makes reading go better if they're just used to everything happening in that target language. Engage for the entire class time. From bell to bell, from Monday to Friday, they're always going to be engaged in doing something. If we can establish that helps reading. Connected to global communities is one thing that reading really helps us with, because we can read about other cultures and people of other places. And then understand that everything has a purpose. And I do want to open this. This is a reflection sheet that we use in my classes, and hopefully it'll open. We do this at the end, a lot of times after the first quarter. And it's a reflection sheet, and students fill it out, and they do it honestly, and it's in English, and it basically they're just honestly reflecting on what they do in class. And they are well, here at the top is, so this is from Spanish 3. I remind them that their grade is a result of their skills and not the task they complete, because that's sometimes the mindset they have from their other classes, is that everything is about the task. If I get this homework done, I get 5 points. And if I get this quiz right, I get 9 out of 10 points. And everything's about task. We want to try to get them to understand that in Spanish, or in our language classes, everything has a purpose in improving our skills. And so they fill this in, and I will share this slideshow with you, and you will have access to this if you want to edit this document and use it or use something similar. I found it to be really powerful with my students. So basically, always, usually, not often, or never. They are answering how often they do all these things. And you'll notice that reading is a big part of a lot of these. When we read something in class, I follow along. When there's a video homework assignment, I watch it closely. When we do an activity in class, I focus on it. I read extra outside of class. Speaking in Spanish, I listen to music. Trivia question, I try to understand the entire description. When we read individually, I do my best to understand. When Profe talks, I listen. When other students talk, I listen. So they go through and honestly answer how often they do that. And then I tell them, if your skills or your grade is not as high as you'd like, look at these categories where the answer is not always, and do it always. So it's one of these small things, trying to get them to understand that everything has a purpose. Even if we're reading something and you're not getting points directly for it, get them to buy into the fact that it has a purpose. It's making you better. And this I put at the bottom here. if you still feel like you're behind, read. Whenever I have students that say, hey, I'm really struggling, I need some help, the first thing I tell them is read. Because what they're a lot of times they're saying is, hey, where can I get extra points? But I want to get them to understand that you'll get more points when you're better at Spanish, and the best way to get better at Spanish is to read. So I do encourage them to read. So again, that has been helpful to reestablish that everything has a purpose. Okay. And then when we talk about reading, a lot of times teachers have questions like, should I read native, authentic materials or teacher created materials? Should I read all at once, like within a few weeks, read an entire novel, or spread it out over the year? Should we read together? Should we read individually? Should we all read the same book? Should I assign different books to every student? And the answer is yes, we should do all those things. We can do all those things, and we should. We should use as much variety as we can when we do reading activities. And all of those things are okay. We're going to talk about some of the different ways we do that. And there's an article here, and I won't read it all. You can read it later if you want, but just an article from Teachers Discovery about some of the ways that we use variety. Read short, read long, read aloud, read silently, read from a page, from a screen, with the eyes, with the ears, funny, serious, and how variety can help the reading that we do in class, for assessment, for pleasure, in class, at home, and so on. So you can read that later, but again, variety is very, very important. Okay, so we're going to look at some steps here for how to do a reading. And I use the word novel as we go through here, but when I say novel, it could be a story, it could really be an article or anything. But when we're going to use a novel or a story, I have, I think, 7 steps here that we can go through to do that. The first one is to choose the novel or the story that we're going to read. So to do that, we need to read the potential novels that our students could read. Now, I understand, and we're going to talk about this in a second, you may not have a choice. You may be forced to do a certain novel, and that's okay. But if you do, the first thing you need to do is read what novels are possibilities for your students. Secondly, you need to read the novel with the eyes of your students, which I think as teachers, we're all pretty good at. But looking at a text and understanding how your students would understand it. Could they comprehend it, and would it be interesting to them? So read it through the eyes of your students, and then select one. Select a novel that seems mostly compelling and comprehensible. Now, when you're selecting a novel that you want to use, it doesn't have to be 100% comprehensible, because you're going to help with that along the way. It doesn't have to be 100% compelling, because you're going to help with that along the way. You're going to make it compelling. You're going to make it comprehensible. You want it to be as compelling as possible, but for that, you're going to add to it. Compelling texts contain humor, relevance, unexpected, incredible details, debate. I have this book that I wrote, Los Sobrevivientes, which is very much not a funny book. It's about some tragic things that happened, but it's compelling because there are some things in there that you can debate. What would you do? What would your classmates do? And there are some incredible details in it. Humor is very difficult I know, as someone who writes stories for students, humor is difficult because humor is very relevant, and what's funny for my students isn't necessarily funny for your students, and what's funny today isn't funny in a month, so it's tough to find books that are humorous, but you can. Things that are relevant, things with incredible details, things that cause debate. As you get to know your students, you get to know what compels them and what really interests them, and those are the stories you want to try to choose. And that's the key to finding compelling and comprehensible text. 1, you have to spend time previewing the text. You need to know the text. And 2, you have to know your students. And we're going to come back to this a couple times tonight. You have to know the text, and you have to know the students. If you want those two to mesh, know the text and know the students. Now, sometimes you're selecting a text for next year's class, and you don't know your students, or you have to make an order or whatever. So then you have to kind of go on the tendency, what you normally see, or talk to other teachers that teach lower levels, or English teachers that have those students, and that can be a little tough. But as you start to do it year by year, you start to see what interests students. So this question: what if I don't have a choice about what my students read? And this happens, as I mentioned, sometimes our department selects the novel, or we have a set of this novel, and That's what we have. We're like, we can't buy anything else, so that's what we're doing. Or somebody else picked one, or the administrator picked one, or whatever. So what do you do? The first thing is to fight the, well, I just say here, fight the good fight with leadership, not meaning don't really fight with your leadership, but to just keep reminding your administrators and your department chairs that, hey, compelling texts, compelling stories are really important. And hey, this one we have, it doesn't really interest the students. Can we look at something else? Just continue to make them understand that compelling is very important, and keep looking for the books that are compelling. Adapt, edit, skip, summarize sections. If you have a book that's really long and not interesting, you can skip chapters. You can summarize chapters. You can adapt and edit some things of what you do and move along a little faster. Be sure to make it comprehensible. If you're reading a text, you're reading a story, a book, that's maybe not the one you would pick if you had a choice, but you have to read it, and it's not super compelling, make sure it's comprehensible, because if it's not interesting and they can't understand it, then you don't stand a chance. So if it's not real interesting, make sure they can understand it, and then we'll work on trying to do this. Try to connect boring texts to interesting activities. So if the text is kind of boring, maybe do some like, what would you do in this situation? How could we change the story? Those type of things to try to make that text more interesting. Also, if you're reading a novel and it's not compelling, add some very interesting readings to rekindle the desire to read. So if I'm reading this novel, it's not very good. Maybe we're going to read an article or a story or something that's funny or really interesting or relevant, because then we don't lose the joy of reading altogether. Just because we had one text that maybe didn't interest me as a student doesn't mean I don't like reading anymore, because we did some other activities where I saw, hey, reading, I can actually do it a lot in the language, and it's fun, and I enjoy that. All right, so after we choose a novel, number 2 is decide when to read the novel, or maybe how long to read the novel. A couple options here. One is that the novel is class. So, and this usually means it's going to be a shorter amount of time that we read it. So the novel is going to basically be most of what we do for the next 3 weeks or the next month, or even a quarter. Sometimes a novel can be a whole 9 weeks or whatever. So that's going to be our concentrated focus, is the content of that novel. The vocabulary and grammar will come from that novel. We'll do all kinds of things to prepare for that. That is class. And that's a good way to do it, especially in early levels, because sometimes that gives you the direction of what language to really focus on. The other option is the novel is part of class. So now maybe we're doing other things, and now we're reading a novel once a week or from time to time, or as we learn some other things, now we can go back to the different chapters and understand it. And now that's probably going to take a little longer, but it's not going to be the entire class. Spread out the novel around other content. And then also we're looking at, are we preparing students for the entire novel? And if we're doing that, then we're probably going to read the novel later in the year or later in their Spanish or French career, German career. Or are we preparing students as they go? So if we're preparing them for the entire novel, we need more time to get a lot of that language into them to make sure that they can understand, comprehend it. If we're preparing as they go, we can start with chapter 1 this week, as long as we prepare them to do chapter 1. And then when we're doing chapter 2, we're going to prepare them to read chapter 2, so we can prepare as we go. So that's 2. Number 3. So first of all, we're deciding on a book. And then we're deciding when we're going to do the book. Then we need to find out what the students don't yet know from the text. So we're going to look for vocabulary and grammar that would be new for your students. So again, you're reading the text before they see it, and make lists. A lot of times what I do is I'll look at the chapter that we're going to read or whatever, and I'll make a list of all the words they wouldn't know. And then I'll take different colors, like maybe pink is something that's not, it's just like something they would learn from context, and maybe blue is something that's really important, and maybe red is something that they're going to see before we get to that or whatever. I'll mark with different colors those vocabulary so I can start to make a plan for how to prepare students to comprehend the text. And it could be grammar, it could be vocabulary. As we get into this, that doesn't mean that you have to pre-teach every new word that your students don't know when you look at a text, because as we know in any language, context and using context clues is a skill that's very important to reading. So we're going to train students to use context to understand words they don't know, and then also to focus on reading passages and not every single word. If we get stuck on the words we don't know, we could just get so intimidated that we quit. But if you read to understand a passage or a page or a chapter, then those single little words, even if you can't figure it out from the context, they're not as important. So that's a skill, and we're training students to learn that as they go. So when we look at a text and we look at the words and the structures that students don't know, there are 4 types of unknown vocabulary. There's the vocabulary that's not important. There's the vocabulary that's understood with context. There is vocabulary needed for comprehension. They wouldn't understand this text without it. And then there is high frequency and valuable for future use, meaning there are some things that we're going to read in this chapter that I want them to internalize and use when we're done with the book in the future. I want them to be able to use it. Like, it's really important. They don't know it yet. This book is going to help them internalize that structure or that vocabulary. So what do we do with it? If it's number 1, if it's not important, just leave it. And again, train students not to worry about it. If you think it's going to be a problem, you can remove it from the text. If you can edit the text, you could define it. But I would say leave it. Number 2 is pretty similar. If it's understood with context, again, leave it. Train them to read with context and then practice that skill. If you want to open this later, when you look at this, you can. Sometimes what I'll do is when I know there are words in a text that students don't know, at the end of whatever activity they're doing, I'll list all those words and I'll say, what does this mean? Define these words based on the context. And they'll have to go in using the context and see if they can define what those words mean. So practice that skill and show them the power that they have, because that reduces intimidation when they see, hey, there may be words I don't know, but when I read passages, context helps me out. If it is a term, the number 3, that is necessary for comprehension, then we need to define it. And we can define it in the text. We'll look at Flangu, and some of our digital texts actually have like hover over words. We can project it on the screen as they read. We can look at it before they read and say, hey, this words mean this. You're going to see these words. We can give them notes. We'll define that word. Now, if it's one of these words, it's okay if they don't have that word internalized when we're done with the book. They just need it to understand this part of the book. Number 4, again, these are the ones that are high frequency and very valuable. Now we want them to use it to understand the text, but we also want them to internalize this structure. So now we're going to define it. Then we're going to internalize it. And we internalize it by doing a lot of things before we read. We personalize it with personalized questions. We use it a lot. We practice it. We can do like Quizlet Live and Text Evade and simple vocabulary practice things with it. We reuse it. We can assess it. Basically, we're going to internalize, do whatever we can to internalize that vocabulary before we read. So again, level 1, not important. Level 2, understood with context. We don't need to do much. Level 3, we need it for comprehension. Level 4, it's valuable for future use. So when I look at my list of new words, a lot of times those are the 4 things I'm marking with different colors, so I know what my plan is before we read. Here's an example. This is not a novel. This is a story from Voces. This is just kind of an example of that. I went through and I pulled out these structures, and you can see the Spanish if you're a Spanish teacher or the English if you're not. And I looked at these structures. These are what my students wouldn't know. And the other thing about that level 4 vocabulary that's valuable for future use, there's only so much of that we can do. Like if we're looking at a chapter and there are 15 terms that students don't know, unless I'm going to spend a month on it, I may not be able to get all those 15 terms internalized really well before we read. So I have to maybe make some of them level 3 that I'm just going to define, and other ones that I'm really going to focus on. So as I was looking at this list, I had to pick the words that I really wanted to focus on, that I really wanted students to have internalized before we read. And these are what I picked. And you know, every teacher has different students. You may have different opinions of what you would really focus on, but I focused on the phrase iba was going to, because I thought that was really high frequency, really powerful phrase. Embarazada is something that students like to talk about a lot. Ojalá pudiera, I wish I could. So this was a phrase that was going to be in this story we were reading. And it was one that I wanted students to internalize and take with them. And so we practiced it a lot. We did a lot of personalized questions like, hey, how would you finish that sentence? I wish I could. I wish we could. And we did lots of practice with it. And after reading that story, students use this phrase now all the time. And this is a complex phrase. They don't understand all the grammar of it. They don't understand all the rules of it necessarily, but they say, we'll be talking in class and I'll be like, hey, are you going to go to the basketball game? You know, back when we used to be able to go to basketball games. Are you going to go to the basketball game? And they'll say, ojalá pudiera. I wish I could, because we used it, internalized it, and then read it, and they took it with them after that text. Pase lo que pase, whatever happens, is another one we were able to do a lot of practice with before we looked at this text. Let me open up Flangu here a second. And see how we were having a little trouble with it a minute ago. I was going to open up a text here in Flangu and just kind of look at that same idea of picking out words that students might not know and understanding what we do. Yeah, it looks like maybe it's not going to open. Look at Flangu, which you will have, if you're a Spanish teacher, access to for 30 days after this. You know, kind of go practice that idea. Open up those books that would be for your level and look at chapter 1 and decide which words would your students not know and what level would those words be, and what would you do. Even if you're not going to read that book, how would you do this with that book and your students? Again, knowing the text is important. Knowing our students is important. Okay, number 4. Make the unknown known. So number 3 is we need to know what they don't know and make a plan for it. Number 4 is pretty similar. Whatever they don't know, we need to make sure that they do know. We define, we internalize unknown language. We use the language in meaningful situations. And that's a vocabulary thing that I've found. It's even sometimes more important than how many reps of a vocabulary term you get. It's how meaningful is your practice. So if I'm pulling a word out of a text that I want students to know, if I can put that into a really meaningful question or a really meaningful situation for them, it helps them learn it so much faster. So like that ojalá pudiera, I wish I could, you know, when have you said that in your life, or how does that apply to you? When would you say that phrase? Anything that can really personalize it and make it meaningful helps it stick. I do storytelling. I know some people don't do storytelling, that's fine, but that helps me. So if I take those terms that I know are going to need for chapter 1 or 2 or 3, I may create a story with them that's not related to the text or the book. It just helps us practice those words. And then we have them when we go to read. Conversations, drawing is great. I put here Pear Deck. I don't know if you have Pear Deck. We have it at my school now, and just getting them to draw pictures of vocabulary and then taking their drawings and talking about them and repeating the vocabulary over and over and over again. There's something about drawing that connects in our minds and helps us remember vocabulary. And then it also allows us to talk a lot about it. And it's fun because, you know, some students are really good and some students are bad, and both of those are fun. Combining terms, say, hey, take this word and make a sentence out of them. There are online things like Quizlet and Textivate that are good for practicing vocabulary. So that's ways that we make that unknown text known. Number 5, pre-reading or introducing the text. So number 4 was basically pre-teaching the vocabulary and the new language they wouldn't know. The next step is to look at an introduction to the text. And we do this for a few reasons. One, it prepares students and reduces intimidation. If they can understand the gist of what they're going to read in this chapter, then when they go to read the entire chapter, they're a little less scared. It can spark interest. I'll show you an example of that here in a second. If we read maybe parts of it or do a summary of it, it makes them want to read the rest of it, just like we do with TV or movie, like a movie trailer. We can do that same thing with reading. Reinforces the details of the story. So if there are certain things that I need to make sure they remember from this chapter, if they see a preview, an introduction, and then they read it, they're seeing it twice, they remember it better. Same idea with the language. It provides extra input. It's just kind of a way to sneak in more language if we do a preview of the story and then we actually read it. When we do a preview, we can do a summary or we can do a section. Let me show you a section. So this is from my book here, El Carterista de Pamplona. It is a Spanish book. This is translated to English for workshops. But this is a part of chapter 14. And it says, Arturo and Clara were running hand in hand, leading the procession of frightened tourists and angry bulls. Because all the roads were blocked, their only option was to enter the Plaza de Navarra. The first floor of the building was filled with smoke and chaos. Some people were yelling fire, while others yelled bulls. Arturo grabbed the rocket and was headed for the exit when Clara let go of his hand. He was searching for her in the dark with Camilo yelling in his earpiece, Arturo, get out of there and leave her. Arturo was reaching for her when boom. So that's not the entire chapter, but that is something that would spark their interest because they want to know what happens there, right? So just a little section lets them know basically what's going to happen and sparks interest. What's going to happen. Here's another example. This is something that I just grabbed really quickly. We did the other day in my class. We were reading the story. It wasn't a novel. It was a longer story. And so we did this preview, and I'll translate this to English. It said, Benny lived in Atlanta with his parents and his grandma. Benny went to a special school, and his grandma took him to school in her car every day. Grandma was Cuban and missed so much. She missed her country and everything Cuban. And every night, his grandma dreamed about Cuba and was very happy. But every morning, Grandma saw the walls, the concrete walls of the other buildings of the city and was sad because she wasn't in Cuba. So that is what we read. Now, that is not a section. That is a summary. And when you do that, you're very careful not to, give away any spoilers. So that doesn't tell the whole story. So there's still some interest to read it, but it helps students understand the basics of what the story is going to be about so that when they get to some things that maybe they don't understand, they're not completely lost and they have that frame, which is also what we can do with embedded readings. And embedded readings is a great tool for reading. It's similar to what we just saw, like a preview, but embedded reading, and some of you maybe have used them, some have not. Embedded readings are this. Students read 2 to 3 versions of the same text, and each version contains more text or more complex language. So basically we're going to read chapter 4, and chapter 4 is long and maybe a little complicated. So we're going to cut chapter 4 all the way back to the very, very basics. And we're going to cut most of the text out, and maybe we're going to write something up or print something up and give it to our students that is 7 sentences, 5 sentences, and it is just the basics. And we're going to make sure they understand that. We're going to read it, translate it, do everything we can to make sure they understand that. And then we're going to add some more details, and we're going to read again. Then we may add some more details and read again. And now when we get to the final chapter, they understand it. And we can be defining words each time as well. Here's an example called La Novia Perfecta. I think this has been translated to English as well. Yes. So here would be chapter 1 of that story. Okay. And now a lot of times you don't necessarily have, sometimes you have a digital version of the story. Sometimes you just have the printed text. But this would be chapter 1 of that story. So if we look at an embedded reading, here's what I would mark as, here's what I would mark as version 1. So I went through that text and I said, all right, what are the most important parts, like the essential? Miguel is 27 years old. He was born in Puebla, Mexico. He can speak English and Spanish. He's not happy. He feels very lonely. He needs a girlfriend. He was bored and wanted to go out with a friend. He got sad. No one wanted to hang out with him. He needed a girlfriend. So with those 6 or 7 sentences, you can really understand most of what happens in that chapter. So we would look at that. That would be in Spanish. We would make sure students understood every word of that. They understood exactly what was happening in that. And then we would read version 2, which is going to have a little bit more of this text in it. And then when we read the actual chapter, it's less intimidating. It's more comprehensible. It's not scary, and we can read it all and understand it. That's a very quick description of what embedded readings are. And you can do them kinds of different ways. You can do them going from a text. You can do it creating a text. But it's a way for students to get exposure to the text before you actually read the final reading. Okay, so number 6 is actually reading. So we've selected a book. We have looked at what we need. We've made a plan for how we're going to pre-teach vocabulary and grammar, and we're going to do an intro. And now it's time to actually read. And we can do that lots of different ways, and we should do it lots of different ways. We should change this up. We can read together as a whole class. We can read together with students reading parts. We can read together with a native speaker. If you have like a CD or an audio, we can read individually. We can read in groups. We change that up. Reading together is what we do most often because it allows me as the teacher to help scaffold things and make sure they understand and repeat things and dramatize things. But you can't do that all the time. Sometimes we have to read individually. Sometimes we have to read in groups. We read the novels, the actual book. Printouts now, if you have permission, be careful with copying things. Make sure you have permission or printing out things. But if you can do paper and, change that up or cut it up or whatever, that helps. We read on the screen, projected in front of class. We read on small screens on the computers. We change that up too. As we read, we reenact sections. We dramatize, do reader's theater. As we read it, sometimes we read it once and then we go back and read it again and reenact it. We translate parts. We don't do a lot of translation, but from time to time, and maybe not an entire chapter, but hey, translate that paragraph. We'll translate paragraphs. We'll do that in partners. Again, drawing. A lot of times when we read, if we're reading together, I will also draw either on a document cam or on the board, just to keep us centered on what's going on. We'll draw what's happening, or students will draw. Sometimes the students draw. Again, that connects. We ask comprehension questions as we go, and we ask personal questions. Hey, this character just did this. Have you ever done that? Hey, this character reacted in this way. Would you react that way? We can ask personal questions and we can ask comprehension questions. Even if they're very, very simple comprehension questions, it's just repeating the language. So we can read all those different ways. Another way we can read is with screencasts. Now, this has become especially valuable now that a lot of us are spending time teaching virtually, teaching remote. Basically a screencast, and I put this slide on here if you want to look at it later. I'm not going to open this part now, but I use a program called Screencast-O-Matic. There are lots of programs. I think a lot of us have become pretty skilled at screencast type things recently. But with Screencast, basically you record yourself and you can record your screen and give it to your students. So I have done that with reading. So you can take a text and you can read it to your students and you can display images, or you can read it to your students and display the text as they hear it. So now we're incorporating some listening and some reading. Let me play a little bit of this one for you. If it'll load for us. If not, that's okay. So this is chapter
Los sobrevivientes, capítulos 9, 10 y 11. Capítulo 9. El hambre, el frío, el silencio, el agotamiento, la falta de esperanza, la cercanía de los cuerpos de los amigos. Las condiciones estaban por vencerles a los sobrevivientes.
So in this example, they're not seeing the text, they're just hearing the text, but they're seeing images and some defined words to help them as they listen. And I'm not going to have time to open all these, but you can, again, look at them if you want. Actually, let me open this one for you. This is a lower level book. This is actually something I was doing to help a teacher to leave spring when everything was remote. And so I was kind of sending this to her students. This one has the text in it. This is a lower level Spanish book. Let me go to like here. Maybe.
Nunca estudia. Nunca hace la tarea. Nunca escucha a la profesora, señor.
And when you do screencasts, if you can do it where you have a little image of yourself, it helps because, gestures, we do those gestures kind of in class to help students understand. If we can do it in a video, they can see the text, they can hear it, they can read it. We have some images that help them understand.
Amy duerme mucho en la clase. La señora García siempre le grita, ¡Ah, Amy!
Okay, so you can see, and again, you can look at those later on if you want, but it varies the way we read. It makes it a little different. It allows them to read at their own pace. If they want to go back, we can do, and I'll show you, I know a lot of us use Edpuzzle. We can put these in Edpuzzle and ask them questions as they go along. We can do lots of things when we create these screencasts. So that's just another way to read. And again, there are some ideas there for how to do that. Another thing, again, and I mentioned this earlier, when we are reading, Skip and summarize this. Here's an example. This was a few years ago. We were reading the Vida y Muerte book, and this we just kind of ran out of time. This is a really compelling book, but we were running out of time at the end of the year or something, and I just didn't have time to read all the chapters we had and get done in time. So I summarized some chapters, and I think for me it was just kind of a liberating moment to realize, hey, you can summarize some chapters if you need to. There we go. Like here's 13, 14, 15. And we did kind of a quick summary of what was happening there to make sure the students understood. Here's some others, just chapter 11 with some things to help them. So you can do some of that as you read too. Maybe, sometimes maybe you don't actually, maybe you just read the story to them and they listen. Maybe they close their books and you read it like a kindergarten teacher would or something. So those are different ways that we can read to our students. All right. Then finally, after reading, post-reading assessment, we ask comprehension questions, and I do a lot of that. Blind quizzes it's kind of old school, but I do like this sometimes. And I'll tell them, hey, we're going to read this chapter of the book today, and afterwards you're going to have a quiz, and you can't use the text for the quiz. So make sure you pay attention, and it really makes them pay attention. Because I wish they would pay attention like that all the time, because everything is valuable. But when you say, hey, there's going to be a quiz afterwards, sometimes they pay extra attention. But any kind of comprehension questions, again, drawing afterwards helps them connect with the text. We have a program called Otis. It's just a quiz making program. Google Forms. If you click on that, there's an example. You can create questions in Google Forms. This is an individual reading comprehension assessment. This is something if a student is reading a book individually, it's just a few little questions go with each chapter. The nice thing now with a lot of the digital books that are being offered is they're enhanced with comprehension questions and websites that go along with them. So that's kind of being built into a lot of books now. This AP question bank, for me, I am an AP teacher. I teach level 3, 4, and 5. And those AP style questions, I like to incorporate as early as possible. So if I'm creating a comprehension question for something we read in level 3, I'll try to use these types of questions just to get students used to them. And then writing and speaking. Writing and speaking after reading is we don't have to do it all the time, but sometimes it's a good way to connect it. When we do that, I like to offer multiple options, not just one option. So, change the ending of the story, write what would happen next, write from a different character's point of view, do a character interview. This one is not the same kind of writing, but I really like this cause and effect activity for writing after a section of a text, where basically you give the students the cause and they have to write the effect, or you give the students the effect and they have to write the cause. It makes them kind of think and use a lot of language to kind of put language together to do it. This was kind of a lot of different things on this, just a vocabulary error. And this, I put the text in here. They actually read a chapter, but there's my book, so I was able to do that. You may not always be able to do that. So sorry, that's not a great example, but here it is. So these were like, here were some causes. Now you have to write the effect. Here were some effects. Now you have to write the cause. It's simple. And, it's not a lot of writing, but it's a little bit of writing, and it really makes them think about the story and what caused what. And those kind of describing cause and effect things are good for when they get into AP and other upper level things. So cause and effect writing is simple and another good way to write. Students' questions, you can have the students make up questions about a chapter, and then they can answer each other's questions. We play a lot of games like Jeopardy type games and all kinds of different games based on what happened in the chapter. I mentioned Textivate. It can be a vocabulary thing. You can also put text into it like stories. Edpuzzle is awesome for any kind of video, including reading. You can make them read and answer questions. You can read to them and answer questions, and you can make sure they actually did it. Again, I don't do a lot of translating, but you can do that from time to time. Oops. And then for one last thing here for assessment for me is, like I said, I think everything has a purpose. And if we believe that reading increases proficiency, then we can assess reading by assessing writing and speaking. So I think and I try to get students to understand this, you will be a better writer and a better speaker if you read. So you may not see a direct points for this reading activity we're doing or this novel we're reading, but you will become a better writer and a better speaker because you read. So if that's what we believe, then we are assessing reading when we assess anything in class. Novels are not, this is just the last note, novels are not the only source of reading. We are constantly reading. I tell jokes every day. A lot of times there's text on the screen as we do that. We listen to a song every day, usually like a different song every week for the first 5 minutes of class with lyrics. We're always reading those lyrics. I do trivia questions once a week. There's always reading involved. And these are kind of ways I sneak in reading. Like they don't even realize they're reading, but there's always reading involved with that. Assignments, like if students have to write something, I'm probably going to make them read something first before they write. So I try to sneak in reading and lots of different sources, not just novels. We're constantly reading. And then there's the other idea, which is free voluntary reading, FVR or SSR, silent sustained reading. If you have a class library, and this is a great way because students then they can decide what's compelling and they can decide what they want to read. This is a little document that I used last year. We haven't got back into FVR this year. And we are going to use, I'll show you Flangu in a second. That's a great tool that's going to really help with FVR because it'll be digital. But when we did it with books in class, a lot of times I would tell them you had to finish one book every quarter. And when you did, you had to fill in this kind of review about the book. And the first side it's all in English, and there were two sides to it. And one side would be, when I would hang it in the classroom, one side would be out for everybody to see, and the other side would not be for everybody to see. So like you couldn't spoil the book, but you could give an opinion and help your classmates decide if they wanted to read that book or not. So that's kind of the backside. Here's the front side. So they're actually scoring how many stars. They're writing a quick summary of what it's about and a review. Did you like it or not? So then other classmates can see that and decide, oh, maybe I want to read that book or not. And then some of these other things that might spoil the ending, that's just for me as the teacher to see, and it goes backwards on the wall. And then Flangu is digital and it's growing, and it's Spanish, and Charles will tell us if there's plans for other languages in the future, but there's so much potential here because now students can pick all these digital books and they can read them, and there's big libraries. This is kind of the thing that we've been kind of waiting for a while. And I used to do it with websites where I would give students a list of different like authentic websites to read from, which that's a good idea too. But these are some of those stories that we can have our students reading. So they can pick different stories. Some of these are enhanced with questions and things that go along with them. But Flangu can be used for that free voluntary reading as well. And that's, again, a way to vary reading and a way to make it really compelling for students. So speaking of Flangu, if you didn't see on the email, this website will get you a free 30-day subscription to try it out if you're a Spanish teacher or you know a Spanish teacher that's interested. And here's some information. This is my website, which has information about these books that I sell and an email address. If you have questions for me, I'd be glad to help answer some questions. We can also do some questions right now. And yeah, what do we got? Yeah, good. About 8:45. So I don't know, Chuck, if there are some questions in the chat.
There isn't too much in the chat, but
okay.
I let everybody know that if they do have questions, they can unmute themselves. And right now would be a great time to ask your questions.
Okay.
There we go.
Hi, Brian.
Hi.
Thank you for your presentation. It was very helpful. I have one of your books, Sobrevivientes, that I read last year with my Spanish 4 kids. And they enjoy it very much. And after that, we watched the movie. That it's old, but it's still pretty good.
Yeah.
My question and comment is that how do you make the kids accountable? Now we're in the pandemic and most of our schools are remote.
Mm-hmm.
And a quick comment is a lot of the textbooks that I've seen, the easy readers or whatever we call them, Flango, a lot of the glossary are words that kids by this time they should know. Like, for example, we're reading in Spanish too, La Familia or something. I don't remember the title. It's a Flango book. And one of the words that is in the glossary is boca. I mean, by that time, the kids already know boca, but there's almost other words and expressions that should be there in the glossary, and they're not. Thank you. I'll take.
Yeah, and some of that, sometimes I know from doing glossaries, it's easier just to put everything in there. But as far as if there's some words that should be in there and they're not, I'm not sure they should be in there. I know in the books that we've published, I try to get all of them in there, especially the ones that are higher level, higher advanced. And then as far as keeping accountability in the pandemic, it is hard. It really is. And there's a few things that I've done. One is Edpuzzle. Do you know what Edpuzzle is? Yeah. So it's doing those kind of screencasts where I'm reading it to the students, and then every once in a while it stops and asks them comprehension questions. And they can't skip ahead, and they have to basically hear it to answer the question right. The other thing I'll do is I will give them questions about a reading, or either read it to them, have them read it, and I'll give them a Google form, and it'll just have number 1 and a blank, number 2 and a blank, number 3 and a blank, and then I'll make a video and I'll ask them orally the questions. And so they don't know what those questions even are until they watch the video, and in the video is the reading. So we're trying to do the best we can. It is tough to keep them accountable. If you can find books that they like to read, that makes it all easier. But yeah. Yep. Thank you for your questions.
Bryan, I have a question. My name is Teresa Ventresca, and I teach Spanish to the little ones. I have from kindergarten to 3rd grade, and I would like to hear some suggestions. What can I do to prepare students with vocabulary before I jump into a reading story?
For little kids, whatever you can do with movement is, the verbs make them, even bigger kids, it works well. But if you can preload that vocabulary with movement, get them to like move and do it, that takes away a lot of the verbs, a lot of the actions. They'll know them before they read it. And then, and you're probably reading pretty simple things at that age. Yeah. And then it's just a lot of just talking back and forth with them, just using that in really natural and personal situations.
Thank you.
Mm-hmm.
I have a question. Actually, I have quite a few questions, and you can answer them as much or as little as you want.
Okay.
I just finished teaching two graded readers to different kids for the first time, and it was a little rocky at points, but it was awesome. I'd like to talk about pace because I feel like I flew through them and didn't really give them the time to aprovechar, take advantage of the. Take advantage of the readings. So can you talk about pace? And then can you also talk, when you mention the importance of comprehensibility, I have, and I think we all have this in our groups, I have a class where they shouldn't all be in the same class. There's, level 2 to level 4, right?
Yep.
And so it's like what, a text is comprehensible for the majority of the class or maybe half the class, but not all. What do you suggest? And then can you also talk a little bit about grades and how you associate grades if you're doing more of a proficiency-based grading system?
Yep. Let me first, your second question about your different leveled students in the class.
Yeah.
Do you have access to different books? Or are you all like, you have to read the same book?
No. And this is the first time I've used novels in the classroom. I'm a new teacher. And so I bought a bunch of FVR novels, but just because of the shared resources, I have students online and in person at the same time. And so I'm going to start covering them with plastic so that I can sanitize them between classes.
Yeah.
But, yeah. So that's an
Because-
option.
Yeah, the one really nice thing about reading is differentiation, which all our administrators love. That's one great way to differentiate, is give different students different things to read.
Mhm.
However, we may not have those resources, and we as teachers are limited in the time we have to create the assessments and to teach. Like if we're doing it all together and we have different kids reading different books, that can be too much for us too.
Mhm.
So what I would try to do then is adapt that text for some of those lower students. And I don't know if you can give them those we're talking about embedded readings. Maybe they're
Yeah, I
seeing
was
more of
thinking.
those first levels,
Uh-huh.
and the other students maybe don't need that as much. The other
Yeah.
thing is, and you mentioned being new to teaching. One thing I've learned over the years is that everybody everybody benefits, even if it's low level. Like, so sometimes maybe you spend some days reading things that are more directed at those lower kids,
Right.
and those upper kids, it's not wasted time. Like, they can benefit from that as well. And then the other times you get things that are more their level.
Mhm.
But that is very difficult. That's something we all face. And then the
Sure.
other thing is, when you're doing activities or assessments based on those readings, you allow them to do different things. You allow the lower level kids to just prove that they understood, and you allow the upper level kids to stretch a little bit. So maybe the lower level kids are just writing a summary, and the higher kids, they're writing a summary, but they can change details or they can add details. You just allow for some stretch.
Okay. That's great feedback.
And then
In
your
terms of
first, yeah,
pacing, yeah,
pacing, yeah. Like I said, you can do them both. You can go really fast, and then you get done with it and you can move on to something else. You can take a long time and really take advantage of everything that's there, and like look up every cultural mention and
Yeah.
really dig into it. I would do some of both and just see what feels right, because if you go too slow, you lose engagement.
Sure.
And if
How
you go,
how many books would you recommend reading in a year, or do
Yeah,
you read in a
I
year?
would see, and it depends on how you're doing it. I would say maybe 2.
Okay.
What levels do you teach?
1 through 4.
1 through 4. Yeah. I don't do more than 1 or 2, because I do a lot of other reading. Like, I create a lot of stories, and we use voices and different things. So we're doing a lot of different kinds of reading. So it's not always novels. So
Uh-huh.
that would kind of depend.
Okay. Very good. And then grading.
Yeah. If grading for a proficiency based class is a lot of writing and speaking, that we're grading the writing and their speaking based on their skills. And it's not necessarily that we're looking for a specific grammar or vocabulary. We're giving them options for what they write about, what they speak about, and then scoring that.
Wonderful.
Now, we
Okay.
do also do a lot of comprehension type things for readings.
And is that you associate a grade with that based
Yeah.
on how many they got right? Okay.
Yeah. Yep. Because we look at that as a skill. So you're reading or you're listening, and and like, can you understand that? That's a skill. Can you read, or can you write? Can you speak as well?
Uh-huh. Okay. Wonderful. Thank you so much.
You're welcome. I thought I saw another hand.
Hi, Brian. May I ask a quick question?
Yes.
Hi. So, when you talked about using the context to help students kind of figure out new meanings of the text, I have often found myself with egg on my face when I try to say, "Oh, look at part," like ante ayer. And you're like, "Okay, well, let's look at ante. What does it mean before? Ayer is yesterday." But when I try to use sometimes the context clues or words around it, the students end up not knowing the words that I'm banking on them knowing.
Yeah.
So do you have any advice for what to do in those situations, or how to
avoid that?
Yeah, how to avoid that.
Yeah. First of all, you have to slow down. Like, you have to understand that they don't hear cognates like you expect them to, and they don't put together words like you expect them to. So you have to really probably do more than you expect when it comes to defining words for them. And then I would just say, train them on it and constantly be checked, even if it's just like a vocal out loud choral answer. Hey, what does ante ayer mean? And just to get an idea of where they're at and how well they're doing. Excuse me. They do actually get better at that as you go and as you train them on that. And yeah, just get them to see how words are put together. Like ante ayer is antes and ayer, and you know, how a lot of English words are the Latin root. You can see the Latin root and start to kind of put those things together.
Okay, so just to make sure I understand, so just you're saying is really just take it slow, and then if you have to essentially, you know, give them the cognations, give it to them for now with the hope that it kind of sticks later on at another time.
Yeah, and then do practice with it. Like I mentioned with the context, do make a list of words that are those type of words and see if they can start to build those or see those constructions, you know, practice it.
Cool, thank you.
Mm-hmm.
Hey, Brian. You know, I'm just kind of a beginner with this, the reading, but I have 5 different books. They're by Lisa Ray Turner and Blaine Ray. Mm-hmm. And so I have, you know, different students reading the different books. And then I just try to do detailed questions. And then with, you know, to differentiate with the students that can do more open-ended questions. And so that's kind of what I'm doing. It's a private school and we have the reader assessments every other week. So the chapters are about, you know, 6 to 9, and like they're present tense, maybe some past tense, and getting into some imperfect. And, you know, these are really kids that want to learn. So I mean, I think this meeting tonight is just wonderful to talk about this, but because I didn't prepare them with any vocabulary or anything, these kids had a good teacher, and I started with the readers after I assessed the class. Mm-hmm. And so I had the same situation as, I don't know her name, 50% of the students were high level achievers and 50% were like, you know, so while I was bridging the gap, I put the high level side on the readers.
Okay. You know, yeah, that's a good idea. Like I said, that's a good way to differentiate.
And what did you say about presenting authentic writings?
So I think you do more of that as you go up the levels. I think when you're starting out level 1, you see a little bit of that, and you see a lot of teacher created or materials that are created for students. Every year you start to add more and more. And when you get to AP, it's, you know, it's almost exclusively authentic texts that are made for native speakers. So I think you want to see that from the early ages, but you don't need to see it as much as you do in the upper levels, if that makes sense.
Okay.
You know, there's different opinions. There's a push for all kinds of authentic, but there is value in what is created for students because it's for students. It helps them practice the vocabulary they need. Yes. They can understand it. I think there's value in both, and it's, you just kind of deliberately decide how you're going to do it as they go up through the levels.
Yes. Thank you.
You're welcome.
But I just feel bad that I'd never even, you know, looked at any vocabulary with them or anything. I did not go through the, you know, some of that, you know, getting them ready process. Mm-hmm. But I will later, next time.
Any other questions?
This is Miriam from Seattle, Washington. Hi, Brian. Thank you so much for hosting this wonderful webinar. We're so grateful. My question for you is, I teach 4th and 5th graders, and we do read using a lot of novels. And I'm wondering if you have written any books that are in the level 1, level 2 Spanish. I noticed that the ones that you have up there might be more advanced, but I still haven't actually researched. So are there any books that you recommend?
For that I've written one. This one here, Perdidos en la Traducción, is at a level 1 or 2 level. The thing is, I teach these upper levels, so a lot of what I write is for my students, and then it ends up becoming these novels. This is one that I actually wrote last year in the pandemic because I was helping out with another lower level class, and so that's kind of where that came from. So I don't know if that would be a good one for you, but as far as for my books, that would be the only one. It is about teenagers and their cell phones and like trying to translate things on their cell phones, and so I don't know if that's a theme that would be good for your students, because that's the other thing we have to think about with our students is not only what can they understand, but what topics, you know, are they interested in, and are they relevant to them. So, but But that's great that you're using novels with that age students. And I wish my daughter is now in third grade and they don't have Spanish at their school. I wish they did. And that's awesome that you're doing that.
My students absolutely love them. And in fact, last year I taught second, third, and fourth and fifth graders. And I had the second and third graders sprung on me at the last minute. And so I used, somebody had asked about lower school, and I used Eddie el Elefante, which I had picked up at a conference in Florida last year. And it was wonderful. And I just literally stretched it out through the whole year. So I highly recommend taking a novel, like you're saying. You can teach 1 or 2 novels and really just doing so many cool things with it.
Yeah.
But the main thing is making sure that the kids comprehend. So like the first thing that I do when I read a chapter, I read it by myself and I find all the words that are new and highlight them, and then just kind of introduce to the kids little by little. And you could use gestures that match the actions with the skills, and make up stories before we actually read the story, so that when they read the story in the novel, it's absolutely effortlessly. They don't even realize that they're having they don't struggle at all. Everything seems very easy.
And when students are reading for the first time in a new language, it's so exciting. Like, hey, I'm reading a book in a language that I just started studying last year. Like, that's really exciting for them. Absolutely. It's another one of the values of reading.
Yep. Thank you so much.
Bryan, I have a quick question.
Yes.
You had this, and I'm a teacher of French, but I understood there was a text about students who don't listen to the teacher, they don't do their homework, What is the title of that book?
That's Perdidos en la Traducción, Lost in Translation.
Okay, thank you very much.
That's the same one I was talking about. So basically that story, there's a boy in Mexico, a girl in the US. They're in language classes they don't care about, and they're not very good. So they think they're just going to use their cell phones to translate, because they're going to take a trip, and they meet each other in the airport and they try to translate with their cell phones, and it just, the phones, the scary thing is now cell phones are really good at that, but in the story they make a bunch of mistakes, and that's most of what the story is.
And what is the level of that?
Level 1. I would say level 1.
And do you have a French version of it or no?
I don't, but maybe we'll look at trying to get one.
Sounds great.
I won't.
Very fun.
Thanks. I think Darren has a question.
I did see a Catherine with her hand up. She might have had that before me in the chat though, so I don't know if, or I could ask right now.
Go ahead.
So, hey, so I've been doing novels for a long time, years and years, all the way back to, Brianna. And so I think a lot of teachers are maybe in this situation where, it's fun to do novels and everything, but at the same time, you got an awesome textbook curriculum you're also going with, and you got to try to find a balance of which one gets the most, more attention, right?
Yeah.
So that's my one thing that even to this day, I'm still trying to find a balance, right? As far as, okay, so we're done with the chores and house unit now. Let's go into something a little more interesting in a novel. And, I don't want to give them assignments overload with a novel on top of, enough assignments that I feel they should have over this chapter of whatever we're doing in the textbook. But my other kind of thought was, we just read to read, and I engage them with questions, but I never really give them assignments, because I don't know if I heard this from somewhere that maybe, if you kind of give them assignments, it takes it, then there goes the pleasure reading aspect of it, maybe.
Right.
And so we just read to read, the novel every other day, and then the days that we're not, it's SSR, right?
Yeah.
Well, not now, right now, obviously, but and then one thing is, I'm always just kind of figuring out which novels I want to read next, and like Spanish 1, maybe you have some thoughts on this, like, does it really matter as far as tense? I mean, at what point maybe do I do a novel with level 1, maybe towards the end of the year, that's got the past tense, since a lot of us maybe feel like we have to stick in the present tense for the entire first year of Spanish or French or what have you?
I think that's fine. I think if they can understand it, and read it, even if you're not spending a lot of time with that in your textbook, I think that's fine. The other thing is sometimes students will read and they don't even know what tense they're reading in. And sometimes it's even frustrating, like what they think is the present and the past. And we have to kind of push them to say, look, pay attention to see, is this present or past, and kind of see the difference. But yeah, I think it's fine to do past tense in level 1.
Sure. You know, sometimes we go the entire year without asking them, hey, what'd you do this weekend?
Yeah.
You know, but, you know, also maybe it just kind of has to do with like overall, just like the complexity of the novel, right? As far as, and the word count, maybe.
Yeah.
I mean, that's really what's more important than maybe the tense. I mean,
yeah. And I think too, with you saying having those other things that you're doing, the textbook and other things, that's a really, that's a good system to be doing the SSR, to be doing the library reading where students are picking what they want to read and reading for pleasure, because you're doing a lot of other things too. And so a lot of times that works out like when they're finish a quiz or something, then they pick up their book and they read it. And so they're just reading it on their own. Thank you. Was there was another question? Catherine, was there Catherine that had a question? If not, that's okay.
Sorry, no, I just don't know how to lower my hand.
Put your hand down, yeah.
I'm losing blood flow by the minute.
I think that's everything then. I think we've answered all the questions. I know there will probably be more. And if there are, you can always email us. Bryan had his email address right up there, so I'm sure you can always just email him your questions. He's happy to answer them. You can also email me anytime. I put my email address in the chat as well. And you are welcome to reach out to either one of us anytime you need it.
Do you want me to share that slideshow with you, Chuck, or is it?
Yeah, if you will share that with me, I will be able to email it out to everybody. Okay. Yeah, because I've got everybody's email address when you registered, so I will be sending an email out that will have a link to Bryan's video that's going to be up on YouTube. Ben's video is actually already up on YouTube, so you can actually go to our YouTube channel and check that out now. And Bryan's will be up there tomorrow. Yeah, I'll have his up there tomorrow. And then when I email you, I'll include all of the links. So you'll have a link to his presentation file so you can download it. There will also be a link to Bryan's website, to Ben's website, to Flangu, to Vose's, basically everything that you need that's been discussed in the presentations yesterday and today.
Are we going to get a certification, did you say?
You are, absolutely. That's all automated though. So I've got everybody's information and it kind of automatically sends. It can only send 100 at a time or 100 per day. And there were almost 700 of you that registered.
Wow.
So it might take a little bit of time to get them all out. I'm going to start that process tomorrow and it's just going to start sending. So you will be getting them as quickly as the system will allow, of course. So just know that that's absolutely on the way.
Bryan, I'm sorry. Can I just ask one last question? Because I'm still a little bit confused. So the Flangu is it meant to be like a digital free voluntary reading, or is it meant to be used the way you presented the presentation? I'm confused.
I think it's meant to be a free voluntary reading, but you could read it with your class all together. I mean, you could pick one book out of there and read it all together and assign it.
Okay.
It's basically ebooks.
They're just basically ebooks, and you're saying that there's a little bit like there are some questions though embedded into it.
And I don't know, Charles, if you want to.
Yeah, absolutely. Okay, so the way that Flangu is designed, it was originally set up to be like an FVR library that you could have access to in your class. So there's over 40 titles right now. There's new titles being added all the time. And there is no extra charge or anything like that for these extra titles. It's a lot like Netflix, where these new titles just get added and it just expands and makes your library that much bigger and that much better. And starting in January, we're going to start seeing titles in French and German as well. So it's just constantly getting bigger and bigger. And it's all encapsulated into just one account that gives you and up to 150 of your students access to it. You have control over the content, so you can decide which titles are available to your students. You can turn books on and off as you want. At the end of every chapter, there are chapter assessment questions, which are basically just Microsoft Word documents that you can download. You can edit, you can take questions out, add questions in if you want, or just use it as is. You can upload it to an LMS if you want to assign it through your LMS like Google Classroom or Canvas. So it's very versatile. Almost all of the titles also contain chapter audio since it's divided by chapters. So you've got like full audio for each one. You just click play and it starts reading it in, or everything's read by native speakers. So it's pretty cool, and it was designed to be super, super, super simple. So it doesn't have like a ton of customization options, but that was very much on purpose because we wanted it to be easy. We didn't want you to have to fumble with buttons and things in order to get it going. If you are looking for something more robust, if you are looking for an honest to goodness curriculum that has more than just stories, that's also going to have things like recording activities, and it's going to have, what am I trying to think of here? The auto-graded assignments, and it's going to tie into your grading book, and it's going to have all these things. Then you're looking more into Voces Digital. And Bryan is also in Voces Digital.
Yeah, I actually watched a webinar on that and it looked really good. It was just a little bit overwhelming to me, just only because I'm a new teacher, and I think like there's too much going on with learning too much, or too much getting put in our brains, and I just think I'm going to try to, I've been trying to keep it simple. So yeah, it looked really great. I'm not at that point yet where I could just juggle all that stuff.
Oh, sure, sure. And believe me, we completely understand. And I think that was one of the big decision makers as to why Flangu ended up being what it is because we really wanted it to be kind of the opposite of Voces, where it was really, really simple. There's not a lot to it. You just open it, click a book that you'd like to read, and read the book.
So is it like, when you say it's like Netflix, is it just, do we pay per month, or do we pay for the yearly subscription?
That's entirely up to you, because we have both. You can pay for an entire year, and right now it's like $99 for a full year, and that includes all of your students and access to every title, and it covers a full calendar year. If you don't need it for a full year, if you just need it for a month here or there, or then I think it's $19.99 or $19.95 a month right now.
Okay, and then I'm sorry, my last question is, but now, well, how many out of those 40, the 40 books that you have, level 1, I teach only level 1. So how many would be level 1? How many are level 2, or?
Oh gosh, that is a good question. 4, 7, 8, 9, 10, 11, 12, 13, 14, 15, 16. I've got 16 books right now on level 1.
Okay, all right. I just wanted a roundabout. It didn't have to be exact. Okay, good. All right, so I just wanted to understand.
And right now we're adding about 2 new books a day. So there's a lot of books getting added to it. And by the time February comes around and those other 2 languages get in here, there's probably going to be close to 150 titles here.
And you don't buy, do you buy it per language, or you have access to all of everything?
You have access to everything.
I have a few students, believe it or not, that are learning different languages on their own, like via Duolingo and stuff like that. Like those are the superstars, which we love. So that's good. Okay, that's really great to know. I'm so sorry to take up so much of your time. And Bryan, I've been to another one of your webinars, and I really do appreciate how like really detail oriented and organized your webinars are. I thank you so much, because last semester you helped me so much.
Oh, good. I hope it wasn't the same thing over again.
No, it wasn't, but it was like every time I saw you, I was like, oh my God, he's so good.
Well, thank you.
Thank you so much.
Yeah. Charles, I'd like to ask, in January, we only have about 5 months this year. So if we buy a year subscription, tomorrow, will that take us in only to the next half of next year? Or do you recommend just, didn't you say we get a month free now to preview it?
You get a month right now. And I put the link up there. If you didn't see it, I will include the link in the email that I send out.
Thank you.
But Yeah, you get a free month right now to try it out, to see what you think. When you log in, up at the top corner, if you click on that little drop-down menu, one of those buttons says "Need help?" with a question mark. And if you click on that, I've got a whole bunch of really short 2-minute and 3-minute tutorials that kind of takes you through how everything works and where everything is.
Okay, thanks. I'll be doing that.
Sure. Yeah, absolutely.
So do you recommend, I mean, I'll get that month and then there'll be 4 more months left. And probably will not be able to, maybe I could get a month just to study to see what to do for this coming year in 21, 22,
Absolutely. It's entirely up to you, however you want to do it. The $99, that is for a full calendar year. So if you got it, if you bought it in January of 2021, you'll have it until January of 2022.
Thank you.
Absolutely. Well, I think that's everything. Bryan, thanks so much for doing this for us and for joining us.
My pleasure. It was fun.
Yeah, it's always a pleasure. And everybody else, I don't know about you, but I'm in Michigan, so it is like 9:30 at night, and I only have one eye open, and the other one's just barely. So I think I'm going to try to get some sleep.
Bryan, can you put your email again?
Do you want me to put it in the chat?
Yeah. Would you do that?
Put my email in the chat here. Oh wait, no.
Or show us your last slide.
Yeah, let me just do that because I'm only chatting with one. Oh wait, let's see. Email. It's not that. There we go.
Can
you
not
see
remember
that?
your email? Okay, there it is.
Yeah, I guess I could just say it, right? Yeah. Oh, now that's loading. There we go. There's the email and there's website.
Oh, hold on. Thank you.
You're welcome.
Yeah.
All right.
And I did put it in the chat for you too. So
thank you.
You can copy paste.
Yeah.
All right. Well, thanks again, everybody, so much. If you have any questions beyond this, don't forget you can always email us. Have a wonderful night.
Thank you.
Christmas.
Merry Christmas. Yeah. Great. Happy
Merry
holidays,
Christmas to
everything. Enjoy your
everybody.
break. Yeah.
Enjoy your I think we've all deserved a
I don't know if you'll get a break, Charles. You might be working more.
Yeah, probably not.
Yeah.
But everybody else, by all means,
have a
enjoy
good
your
night.
break.
Thank you.
Take care, everybody.